Welcome, welcome. We will get started in just a minute as people filter in. Good morning or afternoon, depending on which part of the country you're in. We'll get started shortly. Good morning, Geneva. Assuming that's Geneva from Morton. If so, I'll wave even though you're not on camera. All right, give another 30 seconds. This is going to be super small group because as much as I would love student facilitation to be a widely adopted thing, it is not a widely adopted thing. So we're going to go through kind of how this works as part of the webinar today to be able to share some of that. So let's give another 30 seconds for folks to jump in, and then we will dive in. All right, good enough. Let's do some introductions. And we'll put on my introduction, my glasses so I can actually read. Okay, so for those that don't know me, I'm Marcus. I'm one of the owners of Harmonize, and I have with me Alex, who is our instructional designer, researcher extraordinaire, or I should say researcher of researches, researcher of research papers, pulling together resources for us for these types of things. And today we're going to be talking about student facilitation. So super small group. So keep your questions in the chat if you want, or we can even bring you on voice if you want to have more of a conversation about this. And today's webinar is going to be less of a demonstration of Harmonize. We will show you how to enable student facilitation in Harmonize and what it does. But a lot of the reticence around student facilitation is like, how do we actually run this as instructors? Like, how do we make this work? And so we have some resources to share, and we'll have just an informal conversation around some of the things so you guys can take away what some best practices are in this regard. Alex did a fair amount of legwork on this, and we also have an article written by a researcher, Dr. Alyssa Weiss, who is now with Vanderbilt, big proponent of student facilitation. And there's a lot of research that shows that this is a great tool if you can get it off the ground to sort of raise outcomes, to have your students take ownership of what's going on. So let's, Alex, any logistic, I guess logistics, as I get ready to ask, I know there's logistics, I forgot. We are recording this. We will share it out after the fact, and we will get something put up on our website and in the help guides for you to be able to reference and share out as well. And if we will put the guide, one of the guides I'm going to share, we'll put out into the chat as well. So you have it now without having to wait for the recording. And now, Alex, was there anything else I missed in that regard?
No, I think you covered it. I'm excited to talk about student facilitation.
All right, let's dive in. Power of student facilitation. All right, to begin with, so a lot of what we're going to focus on is like, how do you get your students ready for this? How do you make sure they stay on track? How do you make sure that when you give the keys to the kingdom away, they don't go crazy? And how do you develop that trust that they're going to do the right thing and then it's going to be better for everyone involved? And so I'm going to go through a couple of the sort of prep work items, and then I'm going to jump over to Harmonize and just show you, here's where you set it up so that you can be thinking about what tools do I have in Harmonize to be able to manage this? But then we're going to come back more into the theoretical, like, okay, as an instructor, what is your role when student facilitation is happening, when they are leading the discussion for you? As we're going into it. So this is going to be super informal conversation. Alex and I are just going to treat it as a conversation because we're just exploring this and thinking about it more on our own as well. But really, I think, and a lot of this comes down to like, are your students aware of what's going on? Alex, if you want to handle some of the initial lead in on this one, I can jump in with some ideas I heard recently from some customers, and we can take it from there.
Yeah, so with this bullet point, we were thinking about the idea of maybe having a discussion where students actually discuss and establish and help establish the norms and guidelines for online discussion in your class, for what roles participants have, maybe even some ideas about what role the facilitator could play. So this is something we see a lot in classes, that students will have more buy-in if they get to be involved with setting the norms and the guidelines. And a good way to do that is actually to do it with a starter discussion You can be the one facilitating that first discussion, but your students can actually have a chance to think about what they want to get out of a good online discussion, what the responsibilities of participants are, and you can sort of try to prompt people a little bit if people aren't going, where you want them to go, but probably students are going to say things like folks need to have done the reading and we want people to be respectful. And students, when they have this established as a baseline, then are going to do better with discussions all throughout this semester. And a lot of the time when I see teachers using student facilitation, they are using it all semester long. And so it's a very worthwhile thing to do as a first week discussion to just get the ball rolling.
This one's pretty meta too. So I was talking with Jeffrey, whose name I can't remember his last name, but from CU Boulder. And he was like, they will actually have students develop a full rubric for what are the guidelines for civil discourse, especially if you're discussing something that's contentious. And then in the article we'll share in a little bit, Dr. Weiss actually says when she is facilitating this initial discussion, or even the first couple of weeks of discussion, she is not only facilitating the discussion, but she is putting in meta comments about this is why I said this. Like there appeared to be disagreement between 2 points. And now I'm going to bring those 2 points together, end meta comment, and then make the actual facilitation comment as to what they're doing. So basically we are allowing students this ownership side of things so that they feel vested in it. It's also a great place for them to kvetch about student discussions and how maybe they sometimes feel like checking the box, so they can really say, this is what I dislike about discussion. So they're also establishing norms for what they don't want to see, and hopefully then don't participate in those behaviors. So it can be almost a form of the introduction, like at the start of the class, of like, this is how I run my class, and this is why you're going to take leadership of what we're doing, so that it then goes more smoothly. And in one of the articles we're going to share, Dr. Weiss actually says she will sometimes even run the first, second week of discussion, even when you get out of this sort of meta realm of like discussing how we're going to do discussions. Just because leading by example can be quite powerful for them to understand what's going on, and it gives them time to settle into the class, to be able to get comfortable enough with how the class is rolling, so that when they are then thrust into a more of a leadership position, they're comfortable with it. Right. Anything else on this point, Alex, before we roll on?
No, I was just smiling a lot because I was thinking about how much this is good practice in general. Similarly, when you're doing peer review, which is another kind of student facilitation thing in a way, having students, giving them a space to talk about what they don't like about peer review and to establish norms and then modeling good peer review for them. This stuff is all applicable. So that's kind of just a little
And
little
some
note there.
And something, so when we're establishing these norms and guidelines, something Alex and I were talking about, and we can cover this towards the end a little bit, but to keep in mind, like let's say we come up with a stated paragraph of this is how a discussion should be handled. Here's the civil discourse guidelines. Here's what we're looking for. You could actually put that into your rubric criteria for further discussions, so that you can actually add that into your rubric. We could then help build the rubric with our AI tools. We can talk more about how that would work at the end. But making them basically have created part of your course so that they see their work appearing in the expectations for each discussion going forward can be quite powerful. All right, the student choice side of things, I'll cover this one. This one is a little more legwork, but student choice really empowers what students are doing. So the idea is, let's say you're going to teach a 15-week course. Let's say you're going to have discussions in 8 of those. And let's say you have 20, I'm going to do some nice round math, 24 students in your class. So we might pick 3 student facilitators for each topic. It's not mandatory to have 3, but basically breaking it in class so that everyone is going to have a leadership role throughout the time. A simple Google form for allowing people to select which one they want to facilitate, picking a first, a second, a third choice, those types of things, will let them then know, okay, for example, I'm not going to be super busy with work. I'm doing this as a second time, a second job I'm basically taking classes. I know the week of November 8th, I'm going to be free. I'm going to pick that topic. Or I have interest in week 3 in particular, and I know something about that, so I'm more comfortable facilitating that. If you do this, do it with a Google form or do it with any sort of communication. The legwork side comes in is that, of course, no one's going to want to be first. And there's going to be modules that people are like, that's a terrible one. I don't want to facilitate that one type of thing. And so you're going to have to then take all that data and then do the best you can with it versus you also can just assign students. In particular, you can assign students a little late in the game. So let's say you are going to give them the student choice, or let's say you're not going to give them the student choice. You can actually go ahead and facilitate the first discussion and then notice which of your students are actually doing a good job and pick 2 or 3 of the students that seem to be quite engaged and doing a good job of just participating in general, reaching out to them and say, okay, you guys are going to have week 3. You're going to be my leaders in this. And putting those in place. So it's kind of a question of, are you assigning the facilitators or are you letting them choose? If they choose, as long as they get what they want, they're going to be quite a bit more engaged. You just have to be clear with them that not everyone's going to get what they want because it's impossible that that works out perfectly unless you have a tool that lets them vote and grab things and secure them on their own, which I don't have a tool for you to do that. Anything else on this point, Alex?
Yeah, I had two things. The first, like you said, no one wants to take the first week, but that's why this strategy, I think, goes along well with that strategy. You were discussing with the first bullet about having a few weeks maybe where the instructor is facilitating and modeling the facilitation and sort of pointing out the moves that they're making as they're facilitating, because then like at the same time they can sign up and that means there'll actually be like a week or two to prepare for that first discussion. I'm interested too in this idea of, maybe not having them choose. Like every time I've seen someone use this strategy in an online class, it's been kind of the sign up strategy. But you're right, it can be kind of a logistical nightmare to manage and get everyone signed up. Um, I was reading an interesting article that was about online discussion, or sorry, student facilitation in live discussions. And they specifically recommended not nominating anyone to be the facilitator in advance because the effect of that is often that that student then feels the need to be the content expert and carry everything, and the other students kind of sit back. And I think that strategy maybe works a little bit better in person because like there's still, even if they find out that day I'm the student facilitator, they already knew they were going to be there for 3 hours, right? Or whatever, if it's a seminar or 1 hour. But online, you can imagine like sort of springing it on them a little bit last minute, like, hey, this is just, you're this facilitator this week. And just making sure there's not too much of a load. Like if they're the facilitator and you just assigned them, maybe they're also not the content expert, not needing to like do all of the discussion questions, but they're hopping in and facilitating that like those conversations between their peers and their peers. Everyone has had to prepare equally because no one knew way in advance that this was their week, so to speak. I hope that makes sense.
That stresses me out to think that I could like roll into a week and that they're going to call on me and be like, you're facilitating now. And I'd be like,
Well,
no.
it would be when the week got released, right? It would probably be, you would probably know a week or two in
A
advance.
week or okay. All right.
But it's not so much, you haven't been designated like the owner of that week.
I was just
That
thinking
makes
about tools to do this as you were speaking because I was like, I don't know of any tools. But then I'm like, you know what? My kids do PTA dinners when they were back in elementary school, and we signed up with Sign Up Genius, which was a free website to be able to list out like there are 3 spots available for bringing brownies. I'm like, well, you could use that same free tool to be like, there are
totally
3 spots together, and you can almost use it as a I don't know, a carrot in sense to where it's like we're going to do signups, and whoever participates most in the initial establishing of norms discussion, I'm going to give them the sign up first so that we can really be vested in this, and then I'm going to open it up to the rest of you. So if you really want to choose which facilitation you're going to do, be present and participate, and I will give it to you first. Anyway, so that's a possibility for you as well. All right, let's go on to the next thing. So I'm going to flip over and show you the tools in Harmonize now, because now we're getting into how are we communicating with our students once we actually have this set up. And so I'm in my topic edit screen here for doing my basic instructions. Like normally I'm over here on the instructions tab and doing what I need to do. But when I look in the student facilitators tab, there is, by default, it's off. I've turned it on here. And then for each topic, you are picking people from the roster. So we fill the whole roster here for you and you can pick people. And then we give you an area to do instructions. We are pre-filling a set of like default instructions of what it means to facilitate a discussion for you. So you don't have to write your own, but you can put whatever type of instructions you need here. It can be text, and then of course it can be all the things that Harmonize does, video or screen share or examples or guides or whatever you want to be able to give them. So I want you to keep this part in mind, because as we go into sort of the next things of like, how are we setting expectations for the students? What happens is when we turn this on, and I'm gonna go ahead and publish this one. Um, when those two students come in, we are actually going to pop up the instructions in front of them so that they can see them. And then we are going to put them across the bottom here for everyone to see that here James and Edith are the student facilitators. And once again, we can re-access the instructions that they were given here, so that they can always go back and reference those. So it's not part of your standard instructions. It's in a dedicated space to facilitator instructions. So as we get into how do we tell people what roles they want? How are we handling grading? All of these things we're about to cover. This is where you can put them so that they know who is what and who's doing what and all of those types of things. All right, so do you want to handle this one, Alex? Roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, so your folks are going to want to know what it is exactly they're supposed to be doing as facilitators. And if you've done the earlier activity where you had a discussion establishing norms and guidelines, some of these might be coming out of that, like what students want from a facilitator might have come out of that discussion a little bit. But you'll probably be outlining your own sort of ideas here as well. Some specific things we see are going in and asking questions to deepen the discussion, making connections. The facilitator maybe notices that one person here said something that another person over there, was touching on too. And you can go into Harmonize and use that great adding feature to sort of say, hey, so and so, look at this comment, drawing those threads together, making connections. These are things that students really appreciate. Pushing discussion deeper. What other kind of stuff? Maybe noticing if someone has only posted once and you're noticing lots of people have replied to them, but they haven't come back. Maybe you can come in and at them and invite them back into that conversation, that kind of thing, to just kind of get the wheels moving for that person. Do you have other thoughts here about what kind of roles a student facilitator might take in a discussion?
Is this where we want to cover sort of are you the facilitator? Are you the summarizer? Are you the person
Ah,
leading in?
yeah, that's a great point. So, and this I think segues a little bit into the next bullet, but discussions have different pieces. They have different temporal parts. Yeah, it's two down
It's
actually. I should have
further
put them
down.
next to each other. There, so like I think the way it's stated in our blog cool blog article is that it's like the kickoff, the flow, and then the wrap up or something like that. So you can imagine specifying that you really want your facilitators to be the ones who kick it off. I've seen instructors have students essentially record like mini lectures, like presentations that are kicking off the discussion. Or maybe it's not that, but you want them to develop a few discussion questions or focus areas for the discussion. And they're going in and they're posting those first as the first posts in the discussion. So that's if you really want the students leading that kickoff phase. But there's also kind of the flow. Maybe you don't want your students doing that. Maybe you want to put the discussion questions out there. But what you really want them doing is coming in and sort of greasing those wheels between the different students, connecting their viewpoints, pushing them to go further, really just getting everyone to engage and deepen the discussion. Or maybe it's none of those things. Maybe what you really want that person to do is just come in at the very end and like summarize everything. Like that's a big task. A lot of text gets generated in online discussion. Maybe ultimately the facilitator, the bulk of their role is to go in, be responsible for reading everything, and then like synthesizing things, summarizing things, and producing sort of like notes for the class to have for that week of what was discussed and what was important. So you can really, and probably having someone be responsible for all of those things might be too much. You could imagine designating like 3 student facilitators and asking each one of them to do like a different role there. That could be a variation on this. But there are really different things that your students can do to help facilitate that discussion.
And Alex mentioned this blog post. I'm going to go ahead and put this out in the chat. So this was written by Dr. Weiss, and she is a researcher in online education as well as runs classes. She does them more at the grad level, and that's something we haven't really touched on, which is what level does this really work at? Way more successful at the grad level, or in a undergrad level that's perhaps not the 100-person humanities course type of thing, where you're really trying to create more of a space. I don't know, Alex, if you have other thoughts on what levels this works well at.
Yeah, like definitely if you're trying to do it in the 300-person class, you're going to need to divide it into smaller groups for students to be able to facilitate. But you're right that at lower levels, students might not feel comfortable or confident doing that. That might be where it's especially important to define whatever role you do want them to take really clearly and to have it be maybe smaller rather than you're responsible for the kickoff, the flow, and the summary. I mean, the summary, like that would be maybe a good way to ease people in, right? Giving them that role of synthesizing and summarizing the discussion. I would also say, I think teachers, so undergrads who are in training to be teachers, like this is a great activity for them because ultimately they're going to be going and facilitating discussions, right? So there are certain maybe disciplines at the undergrad level where it makes more sense. But I agree with you that we see it way more often at the graduate level where implicitly a lot of people are being trained to be professors and
Yep.
lead discussions.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a bad idea to even share an article like this. Like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do in that initial discussion, because when you're trying to get that first discussion we were talking about off the ground of like, what are you actually looking for? um, Share this article with them and be like, read this, because this is what we're going to be attempting to accomplish. And I want you to know what I'm after. Like, it does not hurt to share what your goals are and what instructional strategies you're using to do this, because they are now part of the instructional team, right? And so totally fine to be able to share this with them. And this article is broken into those types of the things we're talking about here. So you can come back and read through them. And there's some additional ideas. We're not going to cover everything in this article, but it can go through that. And I noticed Heather Brown is in the audience here. She actually runs the Educause AI community group. And when she popped in, I was like, what role does AI have in this? Which is maybe something we could talk about towards the end, because I can see AI being able to help summarize things. I can see AI being able to help create probing questions or open-ended questions or something along those lines. So hi, Heather. Um, we can cover that towards the end. I don't want to get us bogged down in that to start with, because it could be a long conversation. So anyway, let's move on. I think we talked about modeling the facilitators. Do we have anything else to add on this? We kind of laced it into earlier bullet points.
I think we did lace it in. I think it's a great idea. And
All right.
this we kind of talked about as well. Kickoff, flow, and closing. That was it.
Yeah, there was some additional thoughts I had on this while you were talking about it, and then I forgot them because I'm a little ADHD. But they're coming back now, which is you can actually, depending on your LMS, you can actually grant students who are going to be your facilitators early access using the due date features of your LMS. I know Canvas has this. I'm pretty sure Blackboard has this. I'm a little less certain on the others. But let your students in early. If they're going to be doing the kickoff, you might be asking them to create the first post with the ideas in it. And so you'll have 3 posts from your 3 facilitators. You can grant them 3 days, 4 days early access to get in there and get their stuff written before the other students even come in. So then it's ready for the other students when they do enter and start to work with things as you're going in. So you can kind of power through a little bit with your LMS to get them into that kickoff if you're going to do it. It's really this question of like, are you trying them to be content starters, content experts, etc., or are you just trying to have them respond to what other students are doing? Because then you don't have a kickoff section for them as well. They're really focused on the flow and maybe the closing for that summarize.
Yeah, and even if you don't have that capability in your LMS to let them in early, one thing I've seen instructors do is ask students if the students are doing that kickoff and maybe carrying a little more weight of being content experts that week. Some instructors will have students send them their materials and the instructors will actually just post it in the initial discussion post for them. So that's another option if your LMS is not working with you.
Yeah, and I would say this next bullet point kind of goes back to the like, you don't have to do that, and probably shouldn't do that when you're first trying to get this off the ground, because giving the students a responsibility of just being in charge of the flow or just being in charge of summarization um, can be important. enough of a role for them, and then lets you sort of cut your teeth on the facilitation without actually also having to have them be content experts, because then you have to go in and read their content and be like, no, you're incorrect as well. Or maybe you then use that as an open-ended couple questions to get things started. But it's an extra burden that I would say, unless you're dealing with grad students, maybe don't start. I don't know if Alex, do you agree with that or not?
Well, the interesting thing, yeah, I agree with what you're saying that it's a little bit easier with grad students to make them the content experts. And I think that's actually what I've seen a lot in graduate classes. The problem with it that some of the articles, I was reading around a little bit on the research on this, and one of the problems with sort of designating, you're the content expert this week, I want you facilitating the discussion, is that we can see other students in the class stepping back, not taking as much responsibility, sort of expecting those students to drive everything. And so, the discussion and then the discussion is weaker, right? So you're going to have better discussion if what you focus on less is the content expertise and more the actual facilitation. But I agree with you. There are probably situations where maybe you do want them to be content experts, where that's kind of part of it, especially if you're in a graduate level class and what you're doing is prepping them to be professors, right? The professor comes in and isn't just facilitating the discussion that week. They're also a content expert. So there might be some times that you do want students to take that role on a little bit more.
Yeah, and I could see also, so when we're getting into the content expert, let's say we're actually doing small group discussions. We're going to have a whole webinar on small group discussions coming up next week, week after, something like that. But this facilitation can also be assigned for small group level. So say you are in a
Yes.
50-person class,
Yes.
and you've assigned group work of some sort, and you've used your LMS to break them into groups or whatever. You can actually pick one facilitator from each group, and they will only be listed as the facilitator for that group, and they will have a role assigned to them for that group. So even if it's not content expert, it might be almost project manager, project lead, group lead,
Group
those
lead.
types
I
of
love
things.
that. I love
Um,
that. I love that I wouldn't have guessed that this feature was compatible with the small groups feature, which is just in Blackboard and Canvas, I think. But it's still
this is true.
cool that it is because, yeah, like you can actually sort of have that team leader or group leader, discussion role leader happening in smaller groups within the whole class. That's a great point.
Yeah, so and in Harmonize, back to the Harmonize UI, if I had set up two different groups, for example, James is in one, Edith is in the other, when James's group comes in, they are only going to see James's little head here, and Edith's group will only see Edith's little head there to be able to go through. So it is compatible with groups if you are, like she said, Blackboard and Canvas do small groups. If not, everybody sees everybody, and you just have to informally handle the groups because the LMSs don't send us that data. Wah, wah, wah. As we're going into it. So content expert can be small group lead in a way. There's a little less responsibility than having to learn everything about the week, because everyone, if you're doing small group work, should have done some prep work on the content in question already, because we are now going into that sort of application of content knowledge level to be able to do this. And you'll see when you use our AI discussion activity generator, some of the activities we generate are small group discussions. And if you don't want to be bouncing between each group and trying to facilitate, giving this leadership level to someone else to help them sort of be project manager or group lead can be a good activity as well. All right, what else we got here? You threw this one in, and I was going to give this one to you because there's this tension, right? Of like, I'm the leader, I'm not the leader. If the instructor steps in, am I the leader? What is the instructor doing here? So Alex, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. Yeah, so I saw this one come up a couple times in reading about this topic because I think a natural question you have maybe is, well, if students are facilitating, what's my role as the instructor? And if you've made your students really be the content experts, you can be the one who comes in and is like, oh, you're wrong about that. But that's not very fun and engaging role for the instructor. So, like, what is the role of the instructor? This isn't about sort of abdicating your responsibilities. Instead, you can take on the role of a participant. And a lot of studies do show that having active instructor presence in a discussion really matters a lot to students. So, just because students are facilitating doesn't mean you can't go in there and do that. Maybe because students have taken on that role of facilitating more, maybe that gives you space to just go in and post your thoughts. I do think there's a danger of, your thoughts being seen as better than or superior to other people's thoughts because you're the professor. So you have to be a little careful with this. Um, but just going in and acting as a participant, maybe you could even do it a little meta. Like, here's why I did this as a participant, in the same way that
Y'all,
you model
y'all were
being,
going off the rails here.
well, just like in the same way that in the first couple of weeks you can model being a good facilitator, you can also model like what it means to be a good participant and how to have like good comments and good responses to your quote unquote
Yeah, it's
peers.
interesting because I've read some on this, and it's like it can also shut down the discussion if the instructor
Yeah.
presence is too bold,
Yeah.
or too
Yeah.
overtly knowledgeable, for lack of a better word. Like, oh, the expert's in the room, shh, let the expert speak, type of thing. So,
Yeah.
so just be intentional about what you're doing, and I would say less is more. If it's going and you don't need to step in, no need to step in, like,
Right.
because you have so many other things to do as well. You know, don't worry about it. Heather brought up a good point in the comments, which I think is something that instructors are often concerned about. Like, it's the student anxiety as well. It's like, if the students are coming in and you're giving them this role, like, how are they going to do? And I think this is where, yeah, so Geneva chimed in now and answered what I was going to say, which is that expectation up front is like, look, we're all in this together. Like, there is no right answer to this. Like, be present, and follow these guidelines. And we all agreed on these guidelines. So even if you didn't know what the guidelines were going ahead, do so. And then modeling that for them a couple times with humility of like, this is why I'm doing, here's what I'm going to try to accomplish with this comment. I'm going to try to pull these two threads together. I don't know if it will succeed or not, but here you go. And then maybe have the students do the same. Like, I'm new to facilitating, but I'm noticing this same thing going on over here. And I feel like these two could have union. What do you think? At mention a couple students to pull them into the conversation, and see what you go. So I think teaching humility and showing humility, and what your goal are and what their goal is could help as well. So
I really like what Heather is saying here, though, about, we do, I think, typically see this strategy used in courses where it is either an explicit or an implicit learning outcome. Like, we're seeing it in graduate classes where the idea is you need to prepare to lead discussions one day as a professor. You see it when folks are being prepared to be teachers. But this mention of, like, such as project manager, like, people will go out into the workforce and do things like be a project manager or need to take on leadership roles. And so, foregrounding, this is building an important soft skill maybe, and letting students know that that's part of why you're doing it. We know from like transparency and learning and teaching that letting students know there's a purpose to something is always very helpful to them, rather than just, I'm not making you suffer through being a facilitator just because, like, there's a real thing I
just
want you
because
to
I
take.
didn't want to
Just
facilitate
because
it,
I didn't, I needed to, I have other things to do this week. I'm gonna let
I was
you
gonna go
run
get a cup of
class.
coffee. You guys take care of this, all right? Right.
But there's like actually a real purpose. There's a skill I want you to be able to build, and facilitation and mediation and listening to your classmates and synthesizing. These are all skills that you can take away and use in the real world.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I wish we had brought that up in the initial one, because you're right. Why am I doing this? And it's like, I don't know I don't know if you've been in the workforce yet, but turns out we have to run meetings no matter where we're at, what we're doing, or we need to participate in meetings in a way that's respectful and contributes to the discussion and doesn't just try to show that I know more than you. It's actually like, how are we actually doing this together? It's almost like we're teaching people not to mansplain. Maybe that could be the goal. Um, it's like you can actually have a conversation versus just preaching at people. So that's a possibility as well. Right. What else? I think we got to grading yet? Nope. So cover this one, and then we'll jump back into grading at the end.
This just goes to, if you're really doing this in a way to train folks to be facilitators, like whether they're grad students or teachers in training, you can consider, I think, being a little less prescriptive with what they're going to do as facilitators and let them choose a facilitation strategy. I think this is especially true for like pre-service teachers, because they're familiar maybe with different facilitation strategies, and letting
I
them
was getting
think
ready
about,
to. Can you give some examples of facilitation strategies? Do you off the
yeah,
cuff? Can you? I don't know if I
Yes,
can put you on
because
the spot like that.
no, you can. You can because I was reading an article about it. So I read this cool article where they did some mini case studies and were basically like they did it more open-ended. And then they looked at different strategies that the teachers chose. So one of them had this very specific, like, okay, first we're gonna all answer this what do you know about this topic kind of question, and then we're gonna answer like what questions do you have as you're reading, and then like the last thing is like we're all gonna answer, what did you learn? And then someone else had this totally different approach where it was just like all focused on how does this apply to your life and like how will this like change what you do as a teacher? And the third person had yet another approach to this. And this gave them a chance to develop kind of what they were going to be like as teachers and to practice different kinds of facilitation strategies they might want to try. So if you really are training teachers or professors, you can lean into giving them more responsibility, I think.
Nice. Something that occurred to me a little bit earlier when you were talking about establishing norms and guidelines, tying into this closing aspect, like if you're going to have students summarize the discussion because it was a part of whatever facilitation strategy they were doing, make sure you know that that's important to the students and what they want done with that.
Yeah.
Um, because if week one summary leads into the start of a conversation in week two, then it has value and they should do a good job because their work is going to be on display. It's an important part of week two. Or is it we're going to pull these all together for study exams for an exam at the end or something like that. Whatever the students want out of this in the summary, make sure that the student who is summarizing knows so they find value and they do it with that intent in mind um, as they go through. And this is another area where maybe AI could pull some stuff together if you were able to cut and paste all the information into AI, which may be a bit of a burden. But so let's talk grading. We're a little bit over time. I had meant to wrap up in 30 minutes, but student facilitation is just it's a rich one. So grading, people always ask this, like how do I grade the facilitators versus how do I grade the students? For example, if you're using our auto grade system and we're requiring one post and two comments and the facilitator never makes a post, they're not going to get those points automatically. Maybe consider having all of the points weighted towards the commenting period if you're going to use the auto grading system associated with this, or putting specifically information into the facilitation instructions on what is the facilitator being graded on, and then just going into your grade book and giving them a grade based on that versus what you're grading your other students on. So you don't have to grade them on the same thing. And if you are using our auto grade system, just consider that if you put grades on a post and the facilitator is not required to post, that is not going to give them the points. So just a cautionary tale there. I believe that's it. Happy to hang out and chat about the AI side of things. When we've been digging into peer review, what we find is that students don't often know how to ask probing questions or give constructive feedback or tie things together, and they can be taught to use AI to kind of get their thought process going in this regard. You can use our AI coach if you define in a rubric what you're looking from students. They can use our AI coach to do that. If you're not familiar with that, we can throw out a help guide for that. It's a newer feature in Harmonize to where we could coach them on what the proper behaviors are when they are doing facilitation or when they're in a discussion and make that a key part of the rubric, and then we can coach them on it. So there's a bunch of ways to use AI to assist this. But that's probably a whole nother perhaps webinar of how to use AI to teach students to actually be a part of a discussion as well. So, thanks for grabbing that. Fantastic. So Alex put out the AI coaching one for all people to be able to take a look at. Any questions for us? I know I meant 30 minutes. We're at 40. Sorry. We are recording it. We can share it out. Any questions that we'd like us to jump back into? Alex and I have set aside an hour because we never know if people are going to be super engaged and want to discuss more things. So put the questions out in chat, or if you raise your hand, I can pull you off mute either way. Going once. Going twice. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. This is, I think, the most underused feature of Harmonize because so much research shows that this does wonders for students' investment in the topic. Like and their participation in discussions, because they know they're going to have to facilitate week 3. So they jump in and participate well in week 2 because they want their peers to do the same for them. Even that psychology alone is a great reason to do this. So I always try to encourage more use, but we don't see very much use of this. I'd say it's the single most underutilized feature of Harmonize, to be able to do this. So we will share this video out. If you want to share it with folks, great. And hopefully this works out for some instructor somewhere. Okay, Alex, any parting thoughts?
No, I thought this was a cool discussion. I love a chance to talk about student facilitation. And I appreciated the audience questions and contributions through the chat. So thanks for sticking with us, guys.
All right, take care, everybody.